Tony Martin woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of his wife crying in the bathroom, not sobbing. Cyd Charisse didn't sob. Even in pain, she was controlled, professional. But he could hear her through the door, small, sharp intakes of breath, the kind you make when something hurts badly. Tony sat up, heart pounding. "Cyd?" Silence, then, "Don't come in." He was already at the door. What happened? "Tony, please." He opened it anyway. Cyd was standing at the sink in her slip, back to the door. Her shoulders were shaking. In the mirror, Tony could see her face. Eyes squeezed shut, jaw clenched, mascara streaked down her cheeks. Then he saw her arms. Oh my God! Purple marks, dark shadows, the unmistakable pattern of fingers pressed deep into flesh, shoulder to wrist, both sides of her ribcage, her back, the kind of marks that come from being gripped with tremendous force, repeatedly. "Cyd," Tony's voice came out strangled. "What happened at the studio today?" She finally turned to face him. The most beautiful dancer in Hollywood, MGM's resident ballerina, the woman insured for $5 million, looking utterly exhausted. "It's not what you think," she said quietly. "Then tell me what it is." "It was Gene." Tony went very still. "Gene Kelly? We were rehearsing for the lift sequence. He needed to grip me tightly for the choreography, and how many times did you rehearse this?" "I don't know. 30, 40. Gene wanted the timing perfect." 40 lifts? Tony stepped closer. "Cyd, your arms. I know what they look like." She turned back to the mirror, examining the marks with the detached professionalism of someone assessing damage. "It's worse than usual, but..." "Worse than usual?" Tony's hands were shaking now. "What do you mean, worse than usual?" Cyd met his eyes in the mirror. And in that moment, Tony saw something that terrified him. She wasn't surprised by this. "How long?" he whispered. She didn't answer. "Cyd, how long has this been happening?" 4 months, she said finally. "Since we started Singin' in the Rain." The room tilted. 4 months? You've been coming home like this for 4 months and you never told me? Not like this. Usually it's just a few marks, nothing this severe. But today the lift sequence required more force than usual, and Gene's technique is very physical. "This isn't right, Cyd. This is my job." The words hung in the air between them. Cyd moved past him, back into their bedroom. She pulled on her robe, carefully, wincing as the fabric touched her shoulders. "Every dancer who works with Gene Kelly knows what they're signing up for," she said. "His choreography is powerful, athletic. The lifts require tremendous grip strength. It's part of what makes his style revolutionary. There has to be another way." "There isn't." Cyd finally turned to face him. "Do you know how many dancers would give anything for the opportunity to work with Gene Kelly? This role in Singin' in the Rain, this 5-minute sequence, it's going to make me a star, Tony. A real star." "At what cost?" Cyd looked down at her arms, at the evidence of Gene Kelly's demanding choreography written across her skin. "Whatever it takes," she said quietly. Tony stared at his wife, at the woman who'd survived polio as a child, who'd fought her way from Texas to the Ballet Russe to MGM. The woman who was willing to endure this repeatedly for art. "Does anyone else know? The other dancers?" Cyd sat on the edge of their bed. "Everyone knows. No one talks about it. Gene's style is physically demanding. That's not a secret. But if you want to work with the best, you accept it." "This seems extreme." "He's not trying to harm me, Tony." Her voice was patient. "He's choreographing. His technique requires precise grip points for the lifts to work. Yes, it leaves marks. But when you watch the final product, when you see what we're creating, you'll understand why it's necessary." "Will I?" Cyd's eyes flashed. "Gene Kelly is making me a better dancer. Fred Astaire is gentle. Dancing with Fred is like floating. But Fred plays it safe. Gene doesn't. Gene pushes boundaries. He demands things no other choreographer would dare ask for. And yes, sometimes that means my body shows the evidence of the work. But it also means creating something extraordinary. What if it gets worse? It won't. Gene knows exactly how much force each lift requires. He's a professional. These marks look severe, but they're just surface damage. I'll ice them. Take some aspirin. In 2 weeks, they'll be gone. And then? And then we shoot the sequence. And it will be perfect. And everyone watching will see Cyd Charisse and Gene Kelly creating magic. They won't see this. She gestured at her arms. They'll see art. Tony looked at his wife for a long moment, at her determination, her absolute refusal to see this as anything other than the price of excellence. And he realized something that made his stomach turn. This wasn't going to stop. Not after Singin in the Rain wrapped, not after the marks faded. Because as long as Gene Kelly wanted Cyd Charisse as his partner, she would say yes, no matter the physical toll. I don't know if I can watch this happen, Tony said quietly. Then don't look. She walked past him, back to the bathroom. Tony heard the water running, heard her preparing ice packs for her arms. He stood in their bedroom, alone, listening to his wife prepare for another day of Gene Kelly's demanding choreography. And Tony Martin understood something that no one watching Singin in the Rain would ever know. Gene Kelly's perfectionism didn't just create flawless dance sequences, it left physical evidence on everyone he worked with. The question was whether that evidence was proof of artistic genius, or proof that Hollywood demanded too much from its dancers. 6 months earlier, the first time Gene Kelly lifted Cyd Charisse, she understood. This wasn't Fred Astaire's gentle elegance. This wasn't the smooth, careful partnering she'd learned in the ballet russe. This was something else entirely. It was 1952. Cyd was 29 years old, classically trained, a professional ballerina who'd become MGM's resident ballet dancer. She'd danced with Fred Astaire in Ziegfeld Follies and left him speechless. But Fred Astaire had never left marks on her. Gene Kelly did. The Broadway melody ballet sequence in Singin in the Rain was supposed to be the crowning jewel of the film, a 13-minute dream sequence showcasing Gene Kelly's genius as a choreographer. Debbie Reynolds, the film's young star, couldn't do it. She was 19, untrained. The sequence required a professional. Gene chose Cyd. I need someone who can keep up, he told her during their first rehearsal. Someone who won't break. Cyd had given birth only a few months earlier, but she was a professional. I won't break, she promised. Gene smiled. Good, because I don't hold back. He wasn't lying. Gene Kelly's choreography was built on power, on strength, on lifts that required him to hurl his partner into the air and catch her with precision that looked effortless on screen, but felt violent in rehearsal. When Gene lifted you, he lifted you, not with Fred Astaire's gentle support. Gene grabbed. He threw. He demanded your full weight, your complete trust, your willingness to be manhandled in service of the shot. The first week of rehearsals, Cyd went home with fingerprint bruises on her ribs where Gene had gripped her for a lift. Tony saw them that night when she undressed for bed. Jesus, Cyd. It's fine. He's just precise about where he needs to hold me. Precise? This looks like... It's fine, Cyd repeated. It's Gene Kelly. This is how he works. Tony didn't argue, but he started watching for the bruises. And they kept coming. Gene Kelly wasn't cruel. That's what Cyd told herself during the brutal hours of rehearsal. He wasn't cruel. He was obsessed. With perfection. With innovation. With creating something that had never been seen before on screen. Again, Gene would say, watching Cyd complete a difficult sequence. Not, "Good job," not, "That was close," just, "Again." Cyd would reset, do it again, and again. The 4-inch heels Jean insisted she wear for the vamp section dug into her feet. He wanted her tall, leggy, dangerous looking. "You're a professional," Jean said when she mentioned it. "Figure it out." So she did. She figured out how to dance in heels that weren't meant for dancing. She figured out how to take Jean's powerful lifts without crying out when he gripped too hard. She figured out how to land jumps on a soundstage floor with no cushioning. She figured out how to survive Gene Kelly. The smoking scene almost broke her. Jean and director Stanley Donen decided the vamp character should smoke. It fit the persona, the dangerous woman, the femme fatale. There was one problem. Cyd had never smoked in her life. "You'll need to learn," Jean told her. "We shoot in 3 days." Filming stopped for an afternoon while they taught Cyd Charisse, professional ballerina mother, how to smoke a cigarette. She coughed through the first dozen attempts. Her eyes watered, her throat burned. "You need to look natural," Jean insisted. Cyd practiced. Between dance rehearsals, between fittings, between takes. She hated every second of it. But when they finally shot the scene, she was perfect. The camera panned up her famous legs while smoke drifted lazily from her lips. Seductive, dangerous, flawless. The censors later cut part of the sequence for being too suggestive. The footage is lost now. The original negative destroyed in a fire. But Cyd never forgot it. The hours of rehearsal. The bruises from Jean's lifts. The taste of tobacco that made her sick. All for 5 minutes of screen time. 5 perfect minutes. Singin' in the Rain made Cyd Charisse a star. The Broadway melody ballet was hailed as a masterpiece. Critics raved about the chemistry between Kelly and Charisse, the way they made something impossibly difficult look effortless. No one mentioned the bruises. No one saw the ice packs, the pain medication, the nights Cyd couldn't sleep because her ribs ached. They just saw beauty, grace, perfection. And that, Gene Kelly would argue, was the whole point. 2 years later, Gene Kelly called Cyd for another film. "Brigadoon," he said. "Minnelli's directing. I want you as my leading lady." Cyd hesitated. The memory of those bruises was still fresh. But this was Gene Kelly, and Brigadoon was a lead role. "I'm in," she said. Tony wasn't happy. "You don't have to keep doing this." "Yes, I do." "Why?" Cyd thought about that question, about why she kept saying yes to Gene Kelly when working with Fred Astaire was so much easier. "Because Gene makes me better," she said finally. "Fred makes everything feel effortless. But Gene pushes me to do things I didn't think I could do. He demands everything. And when you give him everything, the work is extraordinary. At what cost? Whatever it takes." Brigadoon was filmed entirely on sound stages. Gene and Cyd performed The Heather on the Hill, a romantic ballet that showcased their partnership at its finest. But behind the scenes, the pattern continued. Gene's lifts, his precise, demanding choreography, his insistence on perfection over comfort. Cyd came home with new bruises. Tony stopped commenting on them. She'd made her choice. The breaking point came during It's Always Fair Weather in 1955. By then, the cracks were showing everywhere. Stanley Donen, Gene's longtime co-director, initially refused to work with him. "I didn't want to co-direct another picture with Kelly," Donen later admitted. "We didn't get on very well, And for that matter, Jean didn't get on really well with anybody. But MGM convinced Donen to return. What they got was a film about aging, regret, and shattered dreams, doomed to fail at the box office. Cyd played the female lead opposite Jean. By now, she knew exactly what she was in for. The rehearsals were brutal. Jean was fighting against time. Musicals were dying at MGM. His star power was fading. He took it out on the choreography. Harder lifts, more complex sequences, longer rehearsal hours. Cyd endured it all without complaint. She was 33 now, a mother of 2. Still beautiful, still strong, but feeling every bruise more acutely. One night, after a particularly difficult day, she came home, and Tony saw her arms. The bruises were worse than ever. Deep purple marks that would take weeks to fade. "That's it," Tony said. "You're done. No more Gene Kelly films." "Tony, no, look at yourself. This isn't right." Cyd looked down at her arms. "It's almost over," she said quietly. "The film wraps in 2 weeks. And then I'm done with Gene Kelly films." She kept that promise. It's Always Fair Weather was the last time Cyd Charisse danced with Gene Kelly in a leading role. Years later, in interviews, Cyd would talk about both men, Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly, with careful diplomacy. "Kelly is the more inventive choreographer," she'd say. "He can create an entire number for somebody else." Then she'd pause, choose her words carefully. "But Astaire's coordination is better. His sense of rhythm is uncanny. Kelly is stronger. When he lifts you, he lifts you. Fred moved like a glass. Physically, it was easy to dance with him. It was not as demanding on me." She never mentioned the bruises in those interviews. Never said that her husband could tell who she'd danced with just by looking at her arms. Never admitted that she'd sometimes lie awake at night aching, wondering if this was normal. But she also never said she regretted it. In 1957, Cyd Charisse made silk stockings with Fred Astaire. It was like coming home. Fred was gentle, patient. He never gripped too hard, never demanded more than she could give, never left marks on her skin. When Tony saw her after the first week of rehearsals, he smiled. "Fred?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Cyd nodded. No bruises, no ice packs, no tears. Just dance. Gene Kelly died in 1996 at the age of 83. By then, he'd become a legend. The man who danced in the rain, the choreographer who revolutionized movie musicals. Cyd Charisse, who was 74, did not attend his memorial service. But she released a statement. "Gene Kelly was one of the greatest choreographers in film history. Working with him was the most challenging experience of my career. He pushed me to do things I never thought possible. The work we created together will outlive us both." She didn't mention the bruises. She didn't need to. 12 years later, in 2008, Cyd Charisse died at age 86 after a heart attack. Her obituaries mentioned Singin in the Rain prominently. That stunning green dress, those impossibly long legs, that chemistry with Gene Kelly that seemed so natural on screen. Nobody mentioned that the chemistry came at a cost, that every lift left marks, that every perfect take required dozens of painful attempts. Because that's the thing about movie musicals. They show you the beauty, the grace, the effortless perfection. They don't show you what it takes to create that perfection. The bruises, the ice packs, the nights when a professional dancer comes home and can barely move. The husband who learns to read his wife's body like a calendar, knowing exactly which choreographer she worked with that day just by looking at her arms. Tony Martin outlived his wife by 4 years. Before he died, a journalist asked him about Cyd's career, about dancing with Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. "Fred made her float," Tony said. "Gene made her work. Which did she prefer?" Tony thought about that question. Thought about all those nights watching Cyd ice her bruises. "She loved dancing with Fred," he said finally. But the work she did with Jean, that's what made her a star. That's what people remember. Was it worth it? The pain? Tony looked away. You'd have to ask her that. What do you think she'd say? I think she'd say yes, because Cyd was a professional, and professionals understand that sometimes art requires sacrifice. Even when it hurts? Especially when it hurts. There's a moment in the Broadway melody ballet that film historians always point to. Near the end of the sequence, Gene Kelly lifts Cyd Charisse high above his head, holds her there for a beat, then brings her down into his arms. It looks effortless, romantic, perfect. What you can't see is how hard Gene is gripping her waist, the pressure of his fingers digging into her ribs, the bruises that will bloom there within hours. What you can't see is Cyd's absolute trust that Gene won't drop her, her complete commitment despite the pain. What you can't see is the cost of that single, perfect moment. But Tony Martin knew. Every time he saw that sequence on screen, he knew exactly where the bruises would be, and he understood that this was the price of dancing with Gene Kelly. Not cruelty, not malice, just uncompromising perfectionism that demanded everything from everyone who worked with him. Fred Astaire made his partners float. Gene Kelly made them bleed. Both created art that would outlive them. But only one left marks on the people he danced with.